Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the establishment of the Integrated Care Board for Buckinghamshire, Oxfordshire and Berkshire West. It's a very significant moment in time that we're gathered here today for. People are describing it around the country as a generational opportunity to do something very different in the best interest of improving population health, bringing together all of the experience of the NHS, from commissioners to providers, alongside local government, alongside the voluntary sector, and strategically delivering better outcomes for more people and integrating health and social care in a way and an attempt that hasn't been tried before. So as the new chair for Bob, I'm hugely optimistic about what we can achieve. But I'm also not naive about the complexity of the challenges that we face as we move forward. I'm hugely enthused by the group of people that we've managed to bring together on this board, most of whom are here today for the inaugural meeting. And before I say anything else, I'd like to go around the room and ask people to introduce themselves, if you may, starting with James.
James Kent, I'm the Chief Executive Officer.
Sim Skavatsa, I'm the Deputy Chair and Chair of the People Committee.
Good morning, my name is Rachel Corser, I'm the incoming Chief Nursing Officer.
Good morning, my name is Saqib Ali, I'm Audit Chair and Non-Executive Member.
Good morning everyone, my name is Nick Broughton and I am the Mental Health Partner Member.
Good morning, my name is Margaret Batty, I'm Non-Executive Director and Chair of Population Health and Patient Engagement Committee.
Morning, my name is Steve McManus and I am the Provider Representative Member.
Morning, my name is Haider Hussain and I'm an Associate Non-Exec Director.
Good morning, I'm Richard Ely and I'm the Interim Chief Financial Officer.
Hello, I'm Aidan Rave, I'm a Non-Executive and Chair of the Place Committee.
Good morning, Dr Rachel Decoe, Chief Medical Officer.
Good morning, Catherine Mountford, Director of Governance.
Thank you, everyone. So this is a what we call a meeting in public, but it's not a public meeting. It's being live streamed, as you can see, and there may be some people watching. We advertised this in advance, and people were invited to submit questions if they wanted to, and we have had a couple of questions which we won't be answering today, but there are a couple of questions which we will then post on the website and post our answers on the website in some detail as well. And the two questions, one was from the 5 health watches across Bob, and it's around how the ICB will go on to assure and demonstrate that to the population that access to health and care services have improved. We will answer that, as I say. And there was another question from a Richard Parnham from Oxford, which is essentially about Oxford and the local traffic neighbourhood plans and how they will ensure access and efficient travel, and we'll give detailed answers to that, and for that one in particular in partnership with Oxfordshire County Council. Now, we have had some apologies for this first meeting from our non-executive members, Tim Nolan. Apology from Dr. Shaheen Jinnah, who's our primary care appointee, and Debbie Simmons, our interim Chief Nursing Officer. And as you've heard, we have our incoming Chief Nursing Officer, Rachel Corser, who joins us formally in September but is here today as an observer. Thank you for joining us, Rachel. We will be having some other people come around the table at the appropriate time when they present. So Matthew Tate, our interim Chief Delivery Officer, will be presenting one item, and then Rob Beasley, our Interim Director of Communications, will also be presenting later on, and some of the other presenters are around the table already. We will not be taking any questions from the floor today, because that's not the plan for today's meeting. It is essentially an establishment meeting, so the agenda is packed pretty heavy, as you've seen, with lots of formal policies and papers that have to be approved for the board to fully function going forward. But in future meetings, the format will be slightly different, and we will explain that at the time. With your permission then, shall we move on? Okay, thank you very much. So, item 2 on the agenda then is about declaration of interests. We have a requirement to maintain an accurate, publicly available register. So the first thing I'd ask is, are there any declaration of interests on today's agenda items from anyone around the room? Please speak now. Nope. Oh, sorry.
There is a small segment about provider collaboratives, and I just state that I am a non-exec of Milton Keynes Hospital, which is in a provider collaborative with OUH, but I don't think that we go into the level of detail that it should become a conflict.
Thank you. Thank you, Heather. We'll make a note of that. And then you'll see on the agenda papers the first register of interests, which also needs to be received and approved. I assume everybody's seen that, and all of you are noted, all the board members are noted on there with their relevant interests. Sorry, Nick.
Jarvis, sorry, I need to amend mine, so I'll do that online. Who's the best person to liaise with? Catherine?
Yes.
Excellent. Thanks, Catherine. Thank you.
Yep.
And I received some from Sim, so we will amend it.
Amendments from Sim and Nick. So we'll add those. It's a living document, as it were, so things change, so that's okay. And whenever anything changes in the future, for those who haven't said anything today, please do inform Catherine immediately so it can be logged on that register and then published. Thank you. Let's move straight on then. On to the governance handbook. So the purpose of this item is a suite of documents in front of you that form the governance handbook that with the constitution set out our governance arrangements. So decisions will be needed on this, and I'll invite our Director of Governance, Catherine, to take us through them, please.
Thank you. So yes, this is quite a volume. And as Jarvis said, it's important that we agree our governance framework today. This is absolutely a starting point. As a new organisation, we will want to continue to work to review this, and part of what I've outlined in the covering paper is the committees or leads responsible for each area, so that you will know where it's going through. And for all elements, again, I wanted to assure the board that we've used NHS England frameworks where they are available, and throughout we've been working with the Good Governance Institute to ensure that everything we're proposing to you is reasonable and will support good governance. So if we take you through the elements, I'm not going to go through the details of individual bits, but the first section is asking you to agree to the establishment of a set of committees, 2 of which have a statutory requirement, and the others, as we have discussed in previous development sessions, link around our desire to be focused on the outcomes required for the ICS as a whole and our role within that, and then also ultimately setting up our place-based partnerships as decision-making committees of the board. I've stopped there. There are then 4 of them whose terms of reference we bring today, but I would like agreement to the establishment of the committees, please.
Any issues? Full support. Thank you.
So the terms of reference, we're bringing you 4 sets of terms of reference today, and overview again where there were frameworks. We use those, worked with the Good Governance Institute, and each non-executive director chair and their lead director has been involved in the development of the terms of reference. So the 4 that wish to bring you today for approval, and if any of the non-exec chairs or lead directors want to add anything, are audit and risk, population health and patient experience, remuneration committee, and the system productivity committee.
I'm seeing nods all around the room. Approved. Thank you.
Yeah. The People Committee and Place and System Development Committee, which are going to be wider committees, both Sim as chair of the People Committee and Aidan as chair of the Place and System Development Committee, wish to do further engagement with partners before bringing terms of reference to the next meeting. And again, do either of you as chairs want to add anything?
Nothing to add, Catherine. Thank you.
Just to say, I mean, it's really important, clearly, that we engage with partners really effectively at this stage, as you know, so that we get off on the right foot, make sure we make the right relationships and build these committees you know, into something that's really meaningful and effective. So I think the extra bit of time, Chair, is really well invested.
Okay, thank you. Approved.
Thank you. Then I'm not going to go through, but there's a small section in the paper about why there are not place committee terms of reference today, because again that's about engaging with partners to agree exactly what it is everybody wants them to do, and that it's not just about delegation of functions from the Integrated Care Board. Functions and decision map is a high-level overview of the governance arrangements of us as an organisation within the wider system. It is not trying to be a picture of the whole of the governance arrangements within the ICS. So in the pictorial representation, it shows the ICB, the fact that it has committees, it will have an executive function and will be working very closely with the Integrated Care Partnership, Health and Wellbeing Boards and Place Committees. It then gives a very brief overview of the purpose of each of our committees, which is of course supplemented by the terms of reference. So again, I'm asking you to approve the overall functions and decision map.
You have approval? Yes. Thank you.
Scheme of reservation and delegation, which you will know clearly sets out those functions reserved to the board and functions that have been delegated to individuals or committees. Or another body. There is less of that in this first document. Again, it will be a living document, and as our committee's development, our delegation are working with provider collaboratives in place, it will develop, so that's part one, and part two is the financial thresholds for matters delegated to officers. Keeping this live and proposing any future amendments will be the Audit and Risk Committee, and we're suggesting quite an early review of those elements as our governance structures bed in. So again, asking for approval of the scheme of reservation and delegation as presented.
Any thoughts? Sakib, as Chair of Audit and Risk, it's on your radar already? Yeah, great. Approved.
Thank you. Standing financial instructions, again, another element in terms of how particularly the officers of the organisation will their business developed using the NHS England template. These will be the responsibility of the System Productivity Committee going forward, and again proposing an interim review but asking you to approve them for today.
You have approval? Yep, thank you. All approved.
Thank you. And then two corporate governance policies, one on managing conflicts of interest, and then a which is for the whole of the organisation and our committees, referencing back to the register we had at the beginning, but also then a shorter one around the standards of business conduct policy, particularly for decision makers, so particularly relevant to the board and then some of our other committees. So again, asking for approval of those two.
Approved? Thank you. Well done, Catherine. A lot of heavy lifting behind all of that. You raced through it and got full support from everybody around the table. Congratulations. But your role is not over yet, of course. On to the next item then, which is still with you.
Yes.
The confirmation of board level named roles.
So as many of you will know, there are requirements through both law and mandatory statutory guidance we get from NHS England of named roles that we are required to formalise as a board, but also submit and publish. This will be another evolving piece of work as we bring more here today. I've concentrated on those few key ones that are board or board level roles that we absolutely needed to have in place for today. Given you a little description about what each of those roles are, the proposed title of the role within the organisation, who will hold it, and then the name of the person that will be in the interim. So to me the place to concentrate is paragraph 10 with the table. One of the new ones in terms of us as a new organisation is confirming our founder member of the Integrated Care Partnerships, which is will be the joint committee between us and the 5 local authorities, and it's important that we nominate our member to start with, and we're proposing that's the chair. accountable emergency officers, Caldecott guardians, senior information risk owners, conflicts of interest guardian, freedom to speak up guardian are roles that previous organisations needed to have. We've confirmed the role that we're proposed to. And the Health and Care Act has named another few executive leads that we also need to confirm at board level, which all sit with the Chief Nursing Officer, Rachel, and there are in fact 2 more that came out slightly later. So again, any questions on any of the roles or comments on the allocation, but if not, I'm asking for board approval, please.
2 in addition to what's listed here?
Yeah, there's 2 in addition, Downs syndrome and learning disability and autism, which also sits with the Chief Nursing portfolio.
Right.
So I don't know if you want to note those as additions today rather than coming back to a future meeting.
I think if we note them in the minutes today, then
Yeah.
they can be approved
Yeah.
at the same time, can't they? Yeah? Okay. Approval. Nick, sorry?
Catherine, I'm just conscious that at a trust level, we also have a board level lead for whistleblowing in keeping with the role of the Freedom to Speak Up Guardian, which may be something that the ICB will want to consider in due course.
Thank you.
Actually, may I ask, on the, for example, the conflicts of interest guardian, I was reflecting, will that be conflicts of interest guardian for the 400 staff, or is it also the wider? Because theoretically, depending on whether, if it's about their statutory organisation, they should go to their local one. If it's about how we're working together, then I think they should feel free to be able to come to me.
Yes, it would be about the wider system working, so where we have committees that involve partner members as well, those questions about those conflicts of interest should come to you.
James?
I was just going to support that. I think a lot of these roles are networked roles. So freedom to speak up guardian, there will be one in each organisation, but anyone is welcome to reach out to any freedom to speak up guardian in any organisation, and they will still get their issues heard. So I think the answer is the focus is initially on the 300 odd staff we have in the ICB, but it is broader and wider than that if it needs to be.
Okay. We have an agreement. Anything more on that?
No.
Nope. Great. Thank you. Sorry, Aidan.
Yeah, just on that, I think it'd be outside of the formal kind of board meetings, it'd be really helpful to explore these roles, you know, as part of our development as a group, partly for our own sake, but also actually for our system partners, so that we can articulate to them really clearly how they can use these roles, and you know, because they can be a little dry, can't they? So we, you know, if we can kind of explore how they work in practice, I think that would be really, really helpful, and a good step in terms of building those relationships that we were talking about before.
It's an excellent point. I think we should follow that up. Yeah. Steve.
So I just wanted to understand a little bit more on the freedom to speak up role that SIM is taking here at the board, but within the organisation you will have a freedom to speak up guardian as well as in terms of the day-to-day go-to person for the ICB organisation as well. But at your role here is really that link at a board level.
Yes, that's the way I see it. Thank you, James. That's the way I see it. And I think, as Aidan said, this is about developing that role and making sure it works for the people within board, but also wider as well. So there'll be liaison with the individual providers, freedom to speak up, guardians, so we can see what's working and what's not.
And most importantly, not to duplicate what other people are doing as well. I think that's really important, duplicating the energy that already exists within partner boards, trusts. Okay. Sorry, Margaret.
Just to clarify on the freedom to speak up, so there will be an executive, not a non-executive, who will have the role of guardian as well, because the board is a representative on the board, but there needs to be an executive, non-executive, a director.
Yeah. Catherine?
Yes, so the discussion we've had is that, that needs to be worked through, and it's the transition from being very small organisations where the CCGs tended to just have a board lay representative, so it was completely out with the management structure in a very small organisation. This is a bigger organisation, and Sonia's going to work with SIM about how what else we need to put in place and how it works in practice.
But the question that I heard there was, is it a requirement for an executive to have the equivalent role as the board member? Is that a requirement? Maybe we don't know the answer.
And it's the requirement on the ICB is not the same as it is on
Right.
as we've highlighted in the cover, in that it's part of our, we think it's good practice and we should have, but it's something that we need to look into how does
Right.
it work in our kind of organisation.
Yeah. So good to do rather than a must do. Yeah.
I think to make it effective, you need to have within the staff structures clear guardians in the staff, that staff
Yes.
know who they can turn to, with the board as almost the last resort and the overview, but you need to have it within the staff.
Yeah. And Sim, that's something you'll follow up with our Chief People Officer.
Exactly that. And
Yeah.
I had a discussion with James about this, Margaret, about that, the structures underneath me that allow the staff to effectively know who to go to and to those people to be accessible. And that's not going to be me all the time.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
we're going to go out to staff and ask them,
Excellent.
you know, how this will work
Yeah.
and what's best to make it most effective.
Excellent. Thank you. Sakib, did you have your hand up?
I did, but the point's been made, so it's fine.
Okay. Thank you. So with those really interesting comments and follow-up work, we approve what's presented? Yep. Thank
With
you.
the 2 additions.
With the 2 additions, yeah. Moving on to item 5 then, development of working with people and community strategy. And our interim director of comms and engagement is meant to present this, and he's hovering somewhere. And come in the room. We'll delay that item until he gets here. Can we move on to item 6 then, and then we'll jump backwards? This is Catherine.
Yeah.
You to give assurance to the board of steps taken to transfer the CCG functions and delegations.
So this is the first paper in almost the second part of the agenda. So the first half was about establishing the new organisation. The second half is about those things that we are transferring over to the new organisation. And this one focuses particularly on the transfer of the staff and assets from the CCG and any open work that there is. And again, I wasn't going to take you through in detail. A couple of things I would want to point out as part of the overall transition. We worked with a lot of oversight and assurance from NHS England, 2 main checklists: the due diligence of close down and handover of CCG business and the readiness to operate statement. And as I highlighted in the paper, both of those received the required assurance. So the correct letters between James as our Chief Executive of the CCGs to Jarvid as our Chair of the ICB, saying due diligence had been completed, and then the readiness to operate statement, which was also signed by the NHS England Regional Director. The other key element is that with open business, we have been aligning our processes, working together, and the teams of staff who own that business have transferred with us, so that work is embedded in our new organisational structure. Again, this is a paper for the board to note, but happy to take questions.
Yeah. Thank you. So it's to note. There's nothing to approve here. It's an update. Any issues, comments? James?
Could I just also add that there's a sort of technical aspect which obviously Catherine's just been through. I also have spoken to the 3 outgoing clinical chairs of the CCGs to ensure they also are comfortable that all the various pieces of business, risk registers, etc., have all moved from one committee to the other, and they are content with that. So, in a more right-brained mode, we've also tried to make sure that we've captured as any loose ends as we could find. So, I just want to reinforce Catherine's point.
That's very good to hear. How are we doing on the aligning of policies in the transfer from CCGs to ICB?
There's quite a lot of that where we have already lined, so the way we work on freedom of information requests, the way we work on complaints is all aligned. The clinical commissioning policies, which are key aspects, all have absolutely the same basis, but there are some very small differences related to local service delivery and availability, and the team who are going to be part of Rachel's directorate. So Rachel might want to talk about it. Chief Medical Officer Rachel, not Chief Nursing Officer, may to highlight that they've got a programme of work in place to deliver that. And again, as the governance lead, what my team are doing is ensuring we have a full register of all of the policies, that clarity of leadership, and absolutely the date by which we're going to have a single policy and which committee is going to oversee it.
Thank you. Rachel, anything to add?
Yeah, so what Catherine references is the clinical effectiveness component of my portfolio, which encompasses the prioritisation committee and looks at individual funding requests. So trying to bring together alignment of policies and single kind of way of ratifying policies across the system, across the three places, to reduce that variation and to ensure equity.
Okay. Thank you. Saki. Oh, sorry. Pop up. Nick, is your hand up? No. Okay.
Can I have one?
James.
Could I just have one other, just highlight in the context, paragraph 1.5. So most of the safe transfer of functions is safe transfer of the functions from CCGs. We are also taking on the delegated responsibility for commissioning pharmacy, optometry and dentistry, which up until this point has been managed by the region. It will still be managed by the same regional team, although they will be tupied to Surrey Heartlands, and it will be managed through a committee in common. So as I just wanted to flag to the board that is additional responsibility that's coming in as opposed to just a transfer across from the CCGs.
Thank you. Very helpful clarification. Okay, so that was to note. Thanks for that information, everybody. Let's jump back now to item 5. We have got Rob Beasley with us, Interim Director of Strategy. So this is an item to note too, and it's very much in draft form. Over to you, Rob.
Yeah, so apologies, Chair, for not being here when the item came up. So I'm going to take the paper as read, but want to add a few words. So the engagement strategy before the board was submitted to NHS England at the end of May and was written in a way which had to meet various criteria set by NHS England. It had been developed by talking to a range of different stakeholders, including our local health watches, and through having an engagement website set up. As you indicated, then this version of the strategy has been deliberately set up to be sort of very high level, and setting out our overall principles for engagement. Now, without wanting to go through the full list of those principles, I just want to say that sort of listening and consulting with people and communities will be at the heart of how we go about gathering evidence for our different decision-making processes. And the trick now is to take those high-level principles and turn them into some practical form. So I will be talking to colleagues in local authorities, in trusts, in organisations like the Health Watches, to learn about their current engagement practices and see what we might be able to use, and then be coming up with some practical proposals on the form, purpose, frequency and so on of some different engagement mechanisms. I won't be doing that alone. I'll be doing that in consultation with people so that we can test and refine those proposals and then come back to the board in September with a set of practical measures.
Thank you. So it's in draft. It's a great opportunity for us to contribute, not just today, but after this meeting as well. I'm sure, Rob, you would welcome that from board members. Are there any comments today, though, from what you've seen? Any thoughts, any nudges you'd like to give, Rob? Steve?
Yeah, so sort of fully support the work that Rob's doing. It's probably just to really ensure that we are kind of utilising the strength of that engagement that we've already got and the structures that we've got at place. And so I know we've done a lot of work within the three places already in terms of our kind of connections through local authorities into Health Watch, into kind of community groups, and then just in the context of the provider group, again, the providers through the NHS Trust and NHS Foundation Trust will have really strong networks into our communities. So I think anything that we can do to actually work with you at place and at organisational level, Rob, to almost make sure that we're already bringing that connectivity into our communities to you, I think really happy to work with you around that and get the provider input in there as well.
Thanks. I've already spoken to both, some of the communications directors in some of the NHS trusts and to my counterparts in some of the local authorities as well about the mechanisms and processes that they've got in place. So the next stage really is to sort of map some of that out and plot it and then try and work out, well, what do we need to put in place that will work for us?
Yeah, but offers like that are greatly received, of course. Yeah. Nick.
Thank you. I suppose just building on what Steve said, the foundation trusts in the system have extensive memberships. So that's one way to access probably 30, 40,000 people. And then thinking about the importance of engaging with young people, we've recently done some fairly innovative work with a social enterprise called Unlock, which is led by young people, and its mission is to empower and give a voice to young people. I'm very happy to put you in contact with them, Rob. They've done some great work. We've got a young people's forum that's been established, and it's already starting to have real traction how we go about our business as an organisation.
Brilliant. Thank you. Also greatly received. Margaret.
Thank you, Javin. Thank you, Rob. I think this is really crucial for our work as a board. And my request is that we try and maximise opportunities for the board to interact with our partners, get out into the community, move around the region, have meetings elsewhere. And ideally, I know board agendas are always so crammed, but allow time for partner stories, patient experiences, hear from our communities, because I think that gives us a sense of realism and energy about what we're about. So that's my plea and request. Thank you.
Yep. Lots of nods around the room for that, Margaret. I think we are here to serve the people, and we've got to embody that in everything that we do, in every way that we try and engage with them as well. So some great ideas there. And as Rob knows, I'm a great believer in the need to have a really detailed and sophisticated communications plan. And that's Rob's challenge to help try and put that together in the complexity that is Bob. But there are along the way some very simple things that we should be able to do. There's the complex stuff as well, which requires wiring and all the infrastructure. But there's some very simple things about how we communicate, the language we use, the approaches that we take, and how we involve people and help them feel that they are part of this journey as well. That this board is not a one that's going to sit in an ivory tower and exhort its wisdom upon everybody else. It's got to be a bottom-up journey that builds on what the population of Bob is saying to us, and our job is to respond. And the comms plan is integral to that. Rob, that's your challenge. I know you've taken it on with some gusto. If there are no other comments, but I would encourage you to connect with board members around the table. I mean, you've had some offers today as well, and there'll be others who've got a lot of experience in their different walks of life that they can add some flavour to your thinking as well.
I will do, Chair.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Let's jump then to the next item, which was agenda item 7. Thank you. And we have with us now Matthew Tate, our Interim Chief Delivery and Finance Officer. And the purpose of this is to note as well, but is to receive the system-wide NHS plan that has been submitted to NHS England already. Matthew.
Thank you, Chair. Apologies, I think I've sat at the wrong place. So, Matthew Tate, Chief Delivery Officer. So I'm here today really just to introduce the operational plan that's been developed across the integrated system over the last few months. And just in terms of process and context, so we received guidance from NHS England Improvement just before Christmas, asking system partners to develop the operational plan for 22 and 23. So that plan covers all of our NHS system partners, and that is important. Obviously, there's a strong, important interface with our local authority colleagues in the discussions and the delivery of the plans, but it is primarily an NHS planning process, so I wanted to make that very clear. So we have submitted various plans, and it's important they are the plans of all of our NHS partners together, and the CCGs as was, and our trust partners. So we collate a set of templates and narratives around money, workforce and activity, and delivery plans against a set of national priorities. And you'll see in the paper the list of national priorities, but they cover the areas you'd expect to see covered in an NHS operational plan, including the importance of the recovery of our services post-pandemic, the importance of us being able to continue with our COVID treatments and some of our capacity to respond to future surges, but also across the range of some of the long-term plan deliverables in the mental health services, in community services. So hopefully the paper gives you a flavour of some of those key areas and key targets for delivery this year. I will hand to Richard shortly to give a sense of the financial situation, but certainly in terms of a workforce position, you'll see that the workforce plans show an increase of just over 3% across the system. And that aligns with some of the ambition that we have. So we have a number of areas where we do have mandated or ring-fenced hypothecated funding, it's often referred to, where that actually is expected workforce growth in those areas. So that broadly is consistent, and obviously within our acute colleagues' plans, there will be some assumptions about funding around elective recovery that will result in workforce growth. In activity terms, the process does tend to focus on the areas where we have stronger data, which tends to be some of our acute colleagues in terms of some of the national targets. So you will see, and we need to correct that as a board and make sure we've got the right reporting, that there's a focus a lot on elective recovery. And some of the key numbers there are to make sure that we are running at activity levels that are slightly above pre-pandemic levels, so that will enable us to reduce our waiting list and backlogs. So you will see that we are making good progress in those plans against some of our long waits on 78 weeks and 52-week waits as well. So, so I think that gives a sense of where we are in service planning, and I hope that the annex gives you a flavour of the key service areas we're focusing on, and also there is a set of our metrics that we will be measured on as a system to give you an indication of areas that we were compliant in terms of the national ambition, which is a whole host of areas we are compliant with that ambition, but also the areas where we haven't quite managed to hit the national ambition. In terms of elective recovery and the expected activity levels as a system, we are below that target by a few percent, but actually when we've had the discussions with our regional colleagues, our plans are seen as ambitious actually. So quite a lot of good feedback around the level of our plans for elective recovery specifically. So in terms of risk, before I hand to Richard, obviously some of the financial challenges Richard will outline, I think we have to be cognizant of the level of cost improvement plans that we've got built into our balanced financial plan as an ICS. Richard will outline the ICB element of the financial plan. But also, I think we need to be cognizant of both the challenges of retention of our workforce, given the pressure across the board, and also our ability to recruit workforce in our challenged market environment, especially around some of the areas around discharge management, for example, is a really challenged area. So I think, and the other risk we need to be cognizant of, because as we've seen over the last 2 years, having the pandemic does have a fundamental impact on our ability to deliver services. So we need to be cognizant of any risk around future COVID surges and new variants and be aware of that. That would have a big impact on our plan. So I think I'll stop there if that's okay, Javid, but I would like perhaps Richard to give an overview on money before we open for questions.
Thank you. Okay, thank you. So I just wanted to emphasise a few things within the financial plans, which obviously underpin the operating plan. The first element is, in terms of approval, the ICB, with the trusts, has got collective responsibility for system balance. For the ICB, budgets are signed off for the 9-month period as opposed to the 12-month period. But we will have to see what the situation is with the CCGs as they terminate in terms of what is brought over into the ICB, and that may or may not have an impact. The ICB allocation overall is 2.9 billion initially, but this changes over the year as allocations are released from NHSC through the year. So for an example, as James has informed us, we have pod being devolved to us, so that's pharmacy, optometry and dentistry. That amounts to £126 million. And there are particular arrangements around this particular allocation. In time, specialist commissioning will also be devolved down to the ICB. That's probably going to happen in 23-24. I'm not sure of the size of the millions for that, but it will be a large sum. And obviously it's going to take quite a detailed way in terms of how we transfer those monies, and a very important part of what the NHS does. Set out in the paper is a balanced budget. That is a requirement on us, as you will have seen from NHSEI, to deliver this. There has been a lot of work that's been done between colleagues in the trusts and ourselves in order to try and reach this. As a result of all of that, we felt able to declare a balanced budget. We still have work to do in order to make sure that we get there. And we have £22 million of cost improvements that still need to be delivered as a system, and which we held within the ICB whilst we develop exactly how we're going to deliver that. It's a relatively small proportion when you consider our total budget of 2.9 billion, and if you look at the budget including the trusts, that is something like £4 billion. So we still have to work on that, we still have to be able to deliver it, and we have to deliver that as a system as opposed to specifically for the ICB element. The ICB budget itself, the target is a £0.3 million surplus. That contains £29 million of CIPs that we have to deliver within the ICB itself, of which 17 million are recurring. Again, all the numbers which I'm setting out to you are within the parameters of the ICSs and the ICBs for England as a whole. In fact, we are certainly about average, but the targets that we have to achieve are no worse, if you like, than that. So the ask that we have got is no better or worse than anybody else throughout England.
Thank you. Before we take any questions, has there been any feedback from NHS England to the plan?
So, as mentioned earlier, I think we've had a review session, not on the latest set of numbers we've submitted, but prior to that, where they were relatively comfortable with our elective ambition. They felt it was an ambitious programme, but that we had good plans in place. We've had a couple of reviews of workforce numbers, which I think have raised some issues around agency plans and the level of growth given some of the financial pressures. We resubmitted the financial plans because we put a draft in and numbers have changed since then. So I'll hand to Richard as whether he's had any feedback on the latest submission.
Generally, NHSEI are accepting of the numbers that we've got. As you can imagine, there will be some areas where they have some concerns. You will expect them to be concerned about the risks which are within our plan. But that, again, is very similar to other systems and not really outside, what you might expect. Particularly given that, I think perhaps what is worth saying is that, we've had 2 years of COVID. We're now starting to come out of it. There are trusts that are experiencing quite a lot of turbulence as we come out of COVID. There are a lot of sickness within the trusts that is having to be covered, which is causing financial pressure. And people are starting to get used to having to work, if you like, back in the normal way and having to achieve targets in the way that we've had to achieve them in previous years. And this settlement is a tight settlement. I think everyone has acknowledged that. So it will be challenging throughout the year in order to be able to deliver it.
Thank you. James, anything to add?
Only found at the highest level, it's a tough financial environment. So we are broadly in flat cash terms as we go from one year to another. And so as inflation rises, reality is we are in a real terms cut. Now, some of that is because of the reduction in additional funding that was put in for COVID, so we can argue whether, how much of that is easy to extract. But I think we shouldn't kid ourselves. It is a tough financial environment, and I suspect it will remain a tough financial environment. I think the second thing I would say is that, you know, these are ambitious, which means stretching plans. So they do require, you know, rigor around delivery, and in reality, not for us not to get blown off course by COVID, flu, and other sort of events that may well come our way. So I don't think delivering it all is going to be easy. But as Richard rightly outlines, I believe we're in a very similar place to most other systems in the country. So the sort of stretch that's being required of us, and the ambition that's being put on us, is broadly, broadly in line. But I wouldn't want the board not to recognise the challenges that lie ahead.
That's very helpful context, and you could overlay that with the fact that even though there isn't enough money in the system, the public and the political expectation is actually running very high. Because people have just had to pay extra to their national insurance, for example, for the NHS, and at some point they will want to see productivity improvements, health improvements, etc., etc. And yet the figures are showing that actually not a lot of that money is flowing through to where it's needed. Margaret.
Thank you, Jordan. So do we build in inflationary pressures? Do we build in expectations of 9%, 11% or so on? Who absorbs the risk? And also questions, I mean, what I'm hearing in another trust is about staff unease, unhappiness about, you know, we're hearing strikes and so on, cost of living, and also impact on services about the winter. And I've heard Chris Whitty talking about the winter in terms of malnutrition, hypothermia, people can't afford the food bills, can't afford the energy bills. So across the system, there's going to be huge pressures in the next 9 months. Do we just all absorb that, or what's the planning for that?
In terms of the inflation position, we were given 2.7% initially for inflation. That has been, in the sort of latest round, that was up to 5.3% for non-pay. So clearly if inflation is above that level, and depending on how the individual trusts have moved into the forward markets, for example, in energy, and some of them have, some of those costs will be mitigated. But over and above 5.3%, there is no additional funding, and those are risks. So when I describe the risks that we had and the areas that NHSCI would have concern about, the ones which the trusts particularly are declaring are certainly around inflation. There are various others as well, but inflation is certainly one. But at the moment, yes, we have to absorb that within the allocations that we've got, which again makes it very difficult given where those numbers are going at the moment.
Clearly something for the risk registers developing. Matthew.
Can I just follow up on the point really around preparing for winter? So absolutely, in our plans there will be a standard set of preparations for the additional demand in winter within trust operational plans. However, given the pressure, there has been a recognition of the need to try and release some capacity during this winter. So we're in the process of working with our partners around a set of bids for a national funding pot called Demand and Capacity Support to help reduce the occupancy going into the winter. So that may give us more ring-fenced resource to try and tackle that as we go into the winter this year.
Aidan and then Sim.
Yeah, I mean, I think you may have just answered it there, Matthew, but the potential impact of an autumn COVID wave, to what extent is that baked into these assumptions? To what extent is it a quantifiable risk that we've got some headroom to do something about?
So partner members may wish to come in and give a specific view on this. I think that we haven't factored in a significant autumn wave into our operational plan. I think, as I just mentioned, around the additional funding, that is designed to give additional capacity. Part of the reason for that additional capacity and the risk that's looking to manage is general demand that will spike in winter, but also the potential of an impact around the pandemic. So I think it's a balanced view. That makes sense.
Sim.
Thank you, Javed. Matthew talked about workforce, and obviously this would be a major concern for this board as it is across all other boards in the NHS, and the pressure on our staff is great. What I think this board will be looking for, and obviously we'll speak to Sonia about this as well, is this idea that we need to be a bit more sort of creative in our thinking in terms of how we can support our staff above and beyond pay, obviously about which we have no control, but we have to find a way to keep our staff. So retention is going to be a major element of what we're looking for. So hopefully you'll be able to fill us in on the types of things that this area will be looking at.
You're happy to work with Sonia and again, partner organisations, because I'm aware of lots of good work that's going on in our trusts at a different level, and there is some coordination on that across the ICS. So lots going on. I'm sure we could bring an update back to the board.
Thank you. And Steve, Nick, would you like to offer a sector view for providers?
Yeah, so there's quite a lot in there in terms of the conversations in there. So on the financial kind of position with inflation, I mean, that's definitely, as Richard said, a risk as we see inflationary levels at sort of 9-10%, and that's kind of not baked into individual provider positions. We've made a level of provision in terms of the baseline budget arrangements, and then we've been able to take some additional opportunity in terms of support from the centre that kind of came into the ICS to actually back off some of the additional inflationary pressures. But there's certainly a risk. However, some of that risk is backed off by the fact on the non-pay side, and some of our energy costs are already locked in. So we are looking at things like where contracts are coming up in year, and the risk of then renewals of contracts driving a higher level of inflationary pressure coming through those. So there's something that we need to do across the providers in terms of understanding that risk better. Again, on the pay side, because for substantive staff, I think the risk of inflation there will be mitigated in terms of any national pay awards, but actually it's through our temporary staffing labour that there is a risk of additional pay inflation. But again, there's some good work happening across not only our ICS, but working with the Frimley system as well, to actually look at reducing our reliance on agency staff, and also trying to manage our agency spend as well. So there's a good programme of work there, but that both is supportive about workforce and our contingent labour, but also looking at the costs as well. And then finally, probably just to say from the provider side, I think there's work that we will be doing over the course of this year and into next year about how we can look at efficiencies through provider collaboratives in terms of working at a greater scale in terms of some of those cost efficiencies, and then those other big units of ICS spend, such as medications, drug spend, where again, by looking at that in a much wider scale across the ICS and within the provider collaboratives, we've got opportunities as we go into next year to actually manage that spend in a more effective way.
Thank you. Very helpful to hear that. Nick?
Yeah, I think we need to be frank. The next few months, perhaps the next few years, are going to be incredibly challenging, perhaps the most challenging that some of us experienced in our careers in the NHS. We are planning for a seasonal COVID infection, and that's being factored into our thinking in relation to how we will deliver the vaccination programme on a sustainable footing. We are anticipating that there may well be industrial action taken in the context of the pay review. And obviously all organisations have pretty robust business continuity plans, which were put to the test by the pandemic and by and large proved to be pretty effective. Workforce is our biggest challenge. It's a national challenge, but there are certain particular challenges associated with this system, not least the cost of living. And if you speak to staff on the front line, one of the things they will frequently tell you is that they feel aggrieved that colleagues working in London, for example, get paid more than colleagues working in Aylesbury and High Wycombe and Oxford, despite the cost of living in those areas being comparable to certain parts of London. And that's something I think this group should A, be mindful of, and B, should advocate on behalf of our staff, because there is a compelling case, I think, for us to move to a slightly more sophisticated approach to terms and conditions for NHS staff. But, going forward, we're heading into some very, very difficult times.
Sobering words. Thank you. Heather?
Thanks, David. Regarding digital and data, I was very pleased to see the priorities that had been chosen, especially around patient-centric experience and population health analytics and patient analytics for GPs. The question is, how are we supporting providers that are potentially less digitally mature to achieve the timelines, the ambitious timelines we've set out for digital and data?
So that may be something that we need to take offline to Ross. From my perspective, and there is...
Ross is our Chief Information.
Yes, Ross, yes, apologies. Yeah, Chief Information, Chief Digital Officer.
Yeah.
But I think just from my... There is a levelling up discussion going on across the strategic digital community, and that will have an influence on how we receive our digital capital allocation as a system, and obviously will be one of the strategic criteria for how we allocate that. So that is an important strategic point, and it is acknowledged in the sort of strategy that we're starting to develop.
And you might want to connect with Heather behind the scenes, to see what support's available from a board perspective on that as well, some ideas and thoughts. And we haven't, in this challenge here, we've talked very much about the ICB, the NHS bit of it, the providers. We haven't mentioned local government at all. When is that going to feature?
So others may wish to comment, but I think from some it was important for me to emphasise that we did come into this with primarily an NHS plan, and that's what we've inherited. Having said that, that we know because our places and our trusts and all of our structures engage local authorities and work with local authorities, and we have substantial joint commissioning budgets and arrangements with local authorities that are reflected in these plans. I think as we move forward in ICB, I think the challenge is for our operational plan to feel like it's wider than the present model, and I think that will probably be supported by a national perspective, but actually it's important that we drive that and align our plans closer to our local authority plans and are able to articulate a slightly wider narrative for the ICB operational plans moving forward. I think the point is that we have inherited this from a present model. Yeah. I think our job is to create a new operational plan that does feel more encompassing to our wider partners.
So it's very much a next phase of the journey.
I think so.
Yeah. Okay. Aidan.
I mean, just linking back to the previous agenda item and Margaret's point, I think the test of these priorities will be our engagement and feedback with our partners and progress towards them more broadly. So I think it's really important that we see a kind of, there'll be a qualitative impact of this plan as well as a quantitative one. The quantitative one, no doubt, we'll sit around the board and we'll discuss. The qualitative impact, we need to get out there and we need to talk to people to understand, from all our different partners, what impact we're making and progress towards it, despite the many challenges that we've talked about just now.
Totally agree. Thank you very much, Matthew and Richard. The report is noted, and we wait to hear further updates at future meetings. Thank you. Shall we move straight on? Onto the system delivery plan then, and it's in the name of Amanda Lyons, but James, you're going to present today.
Thank you. So the system development plan is, what you have here is I think, fourth iteration of a plan that we were first asked to put in place 4 or 5 quarters ago. So it's been an NHS England requirement that we create the plan on how we will build and develop the system. The time frame of the plan has been started before this meeting and runs through to around April 23. It's broadly in 3 buckets of activity. So there's a set of activities in here around what's described as the ICB architecture. So that's effectively how do we get the board in place, the core governance in place, how we do the safe transfer of functions, most of which we're covering off today. And the majority of that is in place, and all of that has been assured through NHS England as the assurer, effectively as our regulator. The second bucket is about ICB development, which is around emerging vision and strategy, also how we're thinking about place-based as well as place-based partnerships and provider collaboratives. And then the third bucket is around enablers, how we're working through around digital data, some of the clinical and professional leadership. In this second and third bucket, what the document shows is it effectively are, if you like, strategy in action. So it outlines the priorities broadly that come from the long-term plan. It outlines broadly where we are either as an either as a system or within our respective sort of trusts. It also sort of indicates the direction of travel, but I'd say in both of those two buckets there is clearly further work to do, but there's also, more importantly, steers that's needed from the board as we move forward in terms of the direction. And obviously some of that we will pick up in the strategy development day that we have later on in July. So I was going to two pages that I would refer people to in the broad deck on admin control, page 214, which effectively shows the various swim lanes, the various components of each of the buckets. And then on 215, it shows the people that we have been working with and engaging with in order to build, if you like, that strategy in action, or the sort of work in action to date. Otherwise, without a pause, happy to take questions. But as I say, this is it's part of the inheritance, but it is not complete. It needs further work as we move forward.
Thank you very much, James. So very much a work in progress to be influenced by the work of the board over the next few months. And it's here to note. But any comments? Any immediate thoughts? Aidan.
I was just pleased to see that in it is exactly what we were just talking about on the previous agenda item about ensuring that we engage and understand impact that way too. So I think it's a good start.
Okay. Sim.
Yes, just wanted to ask James about provider collaboratives. I can see that we've got the Thames Valley Tier 4 CAMs in place. What's progress on an acute provider collaborative or any other collaboratives that will really help us, start bringing the system working together?
Thank you, Sim. So I'll frame, but I suspect Nick and Steve will also want to come in. I think the way I think about provider collaboratives is as a spectrum. So at one end of the spectrum, there is working together, but it is an informal, loose working together. At the other end, it's a formal MOU and contract between providers around delivering services and clarity on overall leadership. And across our system, we have quite a number of collaboratives that fall across the whole range of that spectrum. So the collaborate, and some of them are within the bounds of BOP, and some of them, because of patient flows and other logics, lie broader than BOP. Steve mentioned the work that we're doing on temporary staffing and agency. I'd say that's a good example of somewhere that's in the middle of the spectrum, in the sense that we've committed and signed up to sort of work our way through standard rate cards. It's broader than Bob, actually. It runs into Frimley and into Surrey. Nick, I'm sure, will talk about the Tier 4, who can talk about the Tier 4 collaborative, which is at the right-hand end of the spectrum, so it's a formal. There are also work ongoing between the trusts to think through how to collaborate in the elective care space, which I expect Steve will want to pick up. There's also work undergoing on an MOU, I think, between Oxford Health and OUH around how they can also collaborate. So these conversations are ongoing, maturing. They're building off historical collaborations and a lot of collaboration through the pandemic. But for me, as we move forward and try and consolidate some of the contracting, in other words, make it less bureaucratic, make it more outcomes focused, make it broader, we're obviously looking for either a provider or provider collaborative to take on some of that overall, those broader pathways. And I think the providers, who will speak for themselves in a second, are actually making pretty good progress along that path. But I would.
Nick?
Yeah, James, thank you. So I'm very pleased that mental health is at the forefront of this initiative. So we currently, as an organisation, lead 3 provider collaboratives for specialist mental health services. So in addition to Tier 4 CAM services, those services for children and adolescents with mental health difficulties, we lead a collaborative for secure mental health services, low and medium secure services, and one also for eating disorder services. But to give you some idea of the complexity that we've been able to generate, these 3 provider collaboratives span 3 regions of NHS England and 5 integrated care systems. And it will come as no great surprise to you that they are not coterminous. So they've all got different geographies. But having said that, they are progressing well, and what we've seen, particularly in terms of secure services, which is quite a high-cost service, we have seen a decrease in length of stay, and we have seen a significant decrease in people being placed out of area, which was a major problem. It wasn't unusual for people to be in units which could be 100, 150, in some cases more than 200 miles away from their home address. So we've been able to repatriate a lot of patients, place them in services, including independent services, in our local geography, and through increased oversight and ensuring that we adhere to NHS best practice, we've been able to reduce length of stay. So I think there's a fair amount of knowledge there that we can build on, and that's very much what we're trying to do, certainly in the mental health sphere, and the 2 mental health provider organisations in our system are now working closely together and are developing a provider collaborative, which we think will be the forum for driving forward mental health transformation across Buckinghamshire, Oxfordshire and Berkshire West. And in addition to that, as James has indicated, we've also got a provider collaborative now established with our colleagues at Oxford University Hospitals, which is underpinned by a memorandum of understanding that the 2 chief executives signed about 2 months ago, and is starting to have traction in the community health space, looking particularly at end-of-life care, looking at our urgent and emergency care pathway, but also going forward, hopefully looking at things like neurorehabilitation services, podiatry services, a whole range of services which fall between the 2 organisations in Oxfordshire and perhaps have been hindered in some way by the historic barriers that have been put in place through different organisations with different policies, different cultures, different processes. So what we're trying to move to is having a single team approach, which again I think is a great model for what we're hopefully trying to deliver across the wider system.
Very helpful, thank you. Steve, do you want to come in, and then Margaret?
Yeah, so just building on Nick's point, so from the acute provider collaboration, the headlines around that has been very much the work that we've been doing since last August, September, on kind of formalising the way that the 3 acute organisations work around elective recovery. So we've got structures there that have brought senior leaders together, clinicians being appointed into lead roles across the ICS for elective recovery at service level, starting in areas like ophthalmology, orthopaedics, ENT, and then extending that kind of further into other service areas. And I think we've seen some real gains in that in terms of the way that we've been able to look at that collaboration, supporting some of the elective recovery work that Matthew kind of alluded to, and setting some collective ambitions which go further than the national timetable. So, for instance, eradicating any patients that are waiting in the whole system more than 78 weeks. We've already set ourselves an expectation that we'll deliver that at least 1 quarter ahead of the national timetable. So that's going well, and we're building that out into a more formal level of acute provider collaboration between the 3 acute organisations. So we've had an exec-to-exec between the organisations. Actually, this afternoon, we've got a meeting of chief execs and chairs from the 3 organisations, and the ask this afternoon is threefold. Firstly, that we, again, underpin with a formal MOU around the ongoing collaboration between the 3 acutes. Secondly, that we actually strengthen the structures that we've already got in place with some oversight from the trust chairs on a periodic basis about the work of the provider collaborative. And the third thing is to get agreement from the work we did as an executive group about the next set of priorities that we would look at within the provider collaboration over the next kind of 12 months. We've looked to the east and to the west. We've looked into London in terms of the provider collaborative models that they have there. We've looked to the west in terms of the work that they've done there as well, and we're taking some of the learning from those areas. And probably the last thing I'd say for this board is both in terms of place-based partnerships, but also what we just talked about around provider collaboratives. There's a really important aspect of the function there. So what added value in terms of working in that way for our communities, for our patients, for our population. And at some point we also need to underpin that with, have we got the right form to take that accountability within those collaborations to actually deliver against what we say we're going to deliver. And for the ICB, you know, is there a strength of form in terms of the way that the ICB can devolve accountability, resources, expectations into those collaborations in a way that we can then, you know, discharge against the expectations that you would have of us.
Yeah.
So I think there's more work to do on form, making sure that form is there to absolutely support and underpin delivery.
Thank you very much. Sim, I hope that's helpful. I mean, enormous amount of depth and breadth of work that's going on there. Margaret, you had your hand up, and then James.
That's so exciting. I mean,
Yeah.
Lucas just sparked off there. Going, oh my God, this is what we're about. This is it. This is, you know. So my thinking or thoughts were, this is our added value, right? So where is it in the system? Is it the ICB? Is it the ICP? Is it the place? But how do we bring together and show those examples, Nick, and show you're ahead of schedule for national standards? Convene the partners, convene the players, have that inspiration, show what works, the exemplars of good practice. So I'm not sure where that sits, but that's really exciting.
Okay.
James, tell us where it sits.
Well, I just want to make 2 points. The first is it's really good to hear the articulation of the benefits. So often in these things, it's the rearranging the deck chairs. For me, the provider collaboratives is one of the most exciting pieces that the new legislation actually enables, because we have historically been trying to coordinate, you know, services and whole pathways through contracts basically being held and orchestrated in a third-party way through the sort of CCG. What we're trying to do is get all of those components across pathways under provider collaboratives, which the new legislation allows because of the need to collaborate versus compete. But it means you've got the clinicians and the frontline staff much closer to orchestrating how you do that. That should be able to drive both efficiency and effectiveness out, should make it much easier for patients and patient experience, but also over time will allow us to get more upstream into the more preventative sort of activity. And I think, you know, Nick articulated some of the sort of benefits already coming out of the way the mental health providers work. The second thing is just in terms of our role. So obviously this is for shaping, but for me, we are absolutely not trying to articulate in a top-down way what do the provider collaboratives look like. What I'm trying to do or have been trying to do is being really clear that I see them as a way forward, really clear what the benefits are, and really clear that I'd like to adjust the contracting mechanisms to make these things work. And also quite clear, and I'll be clear again, Dave, Steve, Nick, if there's stuff that gets in the way, come back. So I think our role is to create the framework, but as you can hear, the providers are doing their own work in terms of, you know, what services we might want to collaborate on, because they're closer to it, they understand it better, and they'll drive at the rate that is both important for patients, but also where they've got the bandwidth to sort of move this stuff forward. So that piece, Margaret, of where does it fit, you know, this is where, you know, as well as being a system made up of strong places, we're a system made up of strong providers. And I think given the right framework and context, they will, I'm quite confident, as you can hear, will pick that up and drive, because they have the same mission that we have around improving outcomes, reducing inequalities, financial state. You know, we're all on the same set of goals, and therefore they will help drive that further forward. I'm sure we could do more to amplify some of the good practice, don't get me wrong, but in terms of, I want to be clear, I don't feel our role is to dictate what those things should look like in any way. They will be stronger based on how the providers pull themselves together, I think.
Thank you. Do you want to come back on that, Margaret, just that bit?
Yeah, James. I mean, we've got two
Yeah.
very strong providers here. I don't know others in the place. And actually, Aidan's talking about going out to place and asking providers, are they all aware? Are they all in a position to be inspired and see success and see the benefits? Obviously, they're not all at the same level and awareness and understanding. So that kind of certainly not dictating this is what you do, but convening, enabling, inspiring. That's one. Where is that role? And maybe it's at the place area. I don't know, but I don't think we should be passive in just anticipating all the providers are, full of this kind of ambition and level. But I don't know them. You know them better than I at the moment.
I think they probably are anyway. A lot of these others.
We'll come back to you in a moment, Nick. Whilst this agenda item is being discussed, we've been joined by our local authority member, Stephen Chandler, Chief Executive of Oxfordshire County Council. And we knew you were coming in a little bit later, so thank you, and you'd like to speak.
Yes, thank you, and apologies for being late. I just wanted to put a little challenge into us right at the start that each of these opportunities aren't just, and I know you don't see it like this, but aren't just in the context of NHS organisations. So provider collaboratives really should go beyond the traditional NHS one. And in fact, Nick, here in Oxfordshire, we probably don't describe it as a provider collaborative in the true sense, but there's a great piece of work that the Trust leads on that includes mind and response in providing a seamless pathway for adults with mental health that is jointly funded through local authority and the NHS. And I think we should be pushing much more into the social care space as the provider collaboratives develop. And I think your question about do we wait for people to self-start or do we encourage them, I think we have an opportunity to really encourage at this stage. So to show those examples and say, if they're happening in Berkshire but not in Oxfordshire, why not? If they're happening in Oxfordshire and not in Buckinghamshire, why not? Or what will it take for us to create those conditions for success?
Great. Building on Margaret's challenge, I think, to do exactly that. Nick?
And my point rather builds on what Stephen said. So I think it's important that we realise the provider landscape extends well beyond the 5 NHS trusts and obviously includes our local authority colleagues, also the third sector and obviously primary care. And I think going forward, it's how we can engage with them and create a collaborative landscape that involves all key stakeholders and delivers that sort of joined up care pathway that optimises the resources available and uses them as efficiently as possible.
So great food for thought here for discussions at our away day on the 26th of July, where we can pick up all of this in much more detail. Great. Anything else on the draft system development plan, which, as we said right at the start, is a work in progress? Saqib.
I was just going to comment that with Tier 4 and South 4, it's very positive that it also extends beyond the Bob area. So it's already collaboration between ICBs in a way that we can further draw on in the future.
Great point. Thank you, everyone. James, you will have made a note of all of that, I'm sure. And the next item is the Green Plan, which, again, you are presenting for us.
Thank you, Javid. So the Green Plan is, again, it's been an NHS England requirement that every system creates a Green Plan. This one in some ways further back and in some ways is further forward than the System Development Plan. The way it's further back is it is an articulation of the current green strategies that lie across our various partner members. The way it's further forward is a lot of those plans are actually are really well embedded and have been ongoing for many, many years. So what we've got here is an articulation of effectively the strategy in action. In other words, what our providers and also local authority colleagues are doing across the green agenda, as well as what already was happening in our CCGs on some aspects, for example, around medicines in primary care. The pulling it together has started, obviously, the conversations around the sharing of best practice, where we can work together, where there's ideas in one area that could be helpful in another. So that work, as I would say, is only just beginning. So again, this is one where I'd like the board to note the work that's been done to date, and it's quite a significant amount of work to pull all the various pieces together and frame it in a sensible way. It might be helpful for people to look at page 316, which is the one that outlines the various elements of the green plan and where various providers, etc. are. But again, for me, this is another one where we need to pick up in, as we further develop the strategy, how we ensure that the green agenda and the net zero agenda, recognising that the NHS nationally is about 5% of our carbon emissions, how do we actually make sure that green thread is through the various components of the overall strategy, which clearly is one thing that we will try and pick up when we do our strategy offsite. Otherwise, I was going to pause there, but very happy to again try and take any questions.
Thank you. Second.
Yeah, just a couple of things. So on the electrical direction of travel, the EV, I think that's very positive, and obviously, as we accelerate towards 2030, some of the things that you're doing in staff vehicles and supplier vehicles, etc. And I was actually reflecting on the infrastructure. I was going to come in my electric car this morning, and I thought I might not be able to get home, so I didn't bring it. Obviously, there will be chargers near to here. And then also on the digital, I think this is where it's important that we work with our partners in the local authorities, in that digital inclusion, obviously, again, isn't just from the NHS perspective. For example, as a school governor, during COVID phase 1, all the kids that didn't have iPads or tablets at home were given kit. As soon as it ended, the kit was taken away from them. However, education and show your homework or whatever tool is used in a particular school, they need access to that at all times, or whether it's for their parents or themselves to access NHS care and other online services. So I think joint up thinking there is definitely important to reduce those inequalities.
Digital poverty must not be forgotten. Yeah, point. James, do we have it's called Green Plan here, but a sustainability champion amongst your executive team yet?
It is Amanda Lyons who holds
She'll be the one,
who holds that, who was unable to be here today.
Okay. Any other comments on the paper? So it's again a work in progress. One to note for now, but at some point it will be published. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Well, you'll be pleased to know that is the end of the formal agenda. We've got through a huge mountain of stuff that we needed to do as part of the establishment of the board. I've not been notified of any other business, but we've got a bit of time. There is one, is there? Hand up. Anybody else? Just to manage the time. Just James then.
Well, I wonder if on behalf of the board, I would like to thank Catherine Mountford for specifically. I know many have contributed to get us to this particular point, but Catherine has had the unenviable task of pulling all of this together, and there's a huge amount of work that's gone underneath each of these papers, particularly when we go through large amounts of policies, trying to work out how pragmatically to align across 3 different CCGs, as well as working through new guidance that comes down relatively frequently and in large quantities. So I did just want to I know at one level it's been a relatively dry agenda because we've been accepting inheritances and making sure that we're clear how we're going to broadly operate, but I did want to flag that it's a mammoth effort that Catherine and the team has put in. So from a personal perspective, very much appreciated, but I'm sure it's appreciated by every member of the board. So thank you, Catherine.
Yeah. And in a sense, you've stolen the thunder of my concluding remarks, but it's okay. That's what chief executives are here to do. I wanted to add to those thanks, but also to thank you and the whole of your executive team, actually, because as I said right at the start of today's board meeting, this is a momentous occasion, and there are 42 of us around the country setting off on this journey. But we mustn't forget what we're building on, the achievements of the past. And James and his executive team, and some of them are here, as you can see, Catherine and Rachel and Matthew, Richard, and Rachel to come, of course, but all of the others that aren't here today that have played an enormous part. And we mustn't forget the colleagues who have worked in the clinical commissioning groups for whatever many years up to this point. And today marks not just the merger of the 3 in Bob, but the close down of those CCGs, and then the emergence of the ICB. And that is a difficult journey for our people to have gone on. and especially in the complexity of what is now being created, it is difficult to understand. And so there are people and then their families and all of their responsibilities attached to that, and we must, I think, recognize that that will have been difficult for them, and going forward we need to develop a culture that looks after them as well, because without our people we are nothing. Nothing can be done, and I know the amount of effort that James and Catherine and others have put in to doing exactly that to get us to this point. So on behalf of the board, please accept our sincere thanks for getting us to this point, and also recognize the huge expectations we now have on you to take us to the next phase of this journey. And everybody listening, I don't know how many people are watching online, but those of you that are, thank you for joining us. I know we have a member in the audience from Health Watch, Oxfordshire. Thank you for coming today. This meeting has been pretty dry. We will have a very careful think about future board meetings and how we can make them a little bit more exciting in terms of the agendas that we talk about, which are an opportunity for us to exhibit our passion on behalf of the people of Bob. Because simply doing more of the same is not what we're here for. We want to do different in the best interests of improving population health for our 1.8 million people, and all of the different nuances that sit underneath that, and building on the strengths and the enormous expertise of the people that have come around the room, whether they're local or whether they're independent non-executive members, building that all together. We said earlier that there is an away day, a development day for the board that will be taking place in the third week of July. After today, the committees of the formal committees, the assurance committees, 5 of them, they will begin their journey in terms of sorting out their meeting schedules and so on, and they will start happening. Some of them ahead of the next board meeting. And the next board meeting, I should just clarify, is the 27th of September. It was going to be on the 20th, but it's changed to the 27th, just due to diary clashes. And then the one after that will be the 25th of October. And as I say, committee meetings will have taken place in between them. Lots of work is happening around the place-based partnerships, which will also be formal committees of the board, and the appointments that are necessary are underway, and their activity will begin as well, I suspect, ahead of the next board meeting, so we'll have something to report on those as well. So if there is no other comment from around the room, thank you for all of your support today. Thank you for all the work behind the scenes to get us through it. And I certainly look forward to working very closely with all of you to deliver the ambitions of the new Integrated Care Board. Thank you.